going on, guys? This is episode 7. This is the Buried in the Bones podcast, of course. And today I'm going to talk about how we can use our internally derived attributes and express them outwardly. And what I'm going to talk about is endurance and your expression of it. And so we know about the people who do these amazing feats, and they kind of push the boundaries of what we thought was possible in the anatomical sense and just like the human being sense, but also how these people and you and I can use training endurance or going about things that have what we call a time domain and then stepping in danger of what potentially could lead to failure and some ego death, how we can use tools in endurance, and then how we can use those things just practically, mentally, spiritually, and physically, of course. So, as you guys know, I believe endurance is an internally derived attribute, and that attribute is expressed outwardly. And you can see it a lot in the people you meet and those who are able to sit in the unknown and deal with problems that most can't. And for some reason, they always seem to find an end. But it's cool, man. Endurance in general, it teaches you a lot of life lessons, a lot of practical ones. It also allows you to sit back and look at the journey it took to get there, how you did it, the preparation it took, who you became during it, the training in your mind and in your body, and the mindful rumination that happens and your meditation over it. So it's not just the mental and physical preparation, but also what it does for you spiritually. And so I'm going to tell you guys a story about, I'll tell you one, and it's going to be a story I've mentioned, but it might have been one of the most memorable ultra endurance events I have done, and it is called the Rim to Rim to Rim in the Grand Canyon. And so let me paint the scene for you. The Grand Canyon, as you know, is a massive hole in the world, in the United States, in Arizona. And basically the Rim to Rim, the rim consists of starting at the south rim of the Grand Canyon. You traverse down into the canyon, and then you walk across it, north to south essentially, and you end up on the north side, or south to north, and then you end up on the north side of the Grand Canyon. So at one point you're closer to Flagstaff, Arizona, and then you started in Arizona, and then all of a sudden you get to the end and you're like, I'm almost in Vegas. I'm closer to Vegas than I am to home, which is super fascinating. But it has 20,000 feet of elevation change and about 12,000 feet of total gain, and then it's about 48.9 miles-ish. And then if you take additional routes or you have to segue, depending on where you're at within the journey, it can change things. But here's the deal. We had 3 people at the time, and it really just started as, man, what a great lesson this was for me. It really started as, well, one, I was on my own journey. I had just moved to Arizona probably about 4 or 5 months prior, and I was looking for some community, and I was also looking for some ego fill and challenge. At the time I thought it was challenge, but in reality, it kind of, now looking back at it, it was a placeholder to pause what was important and kind of distract me from what I actually needed to take care of. And looking back, it was very useful for me, but also I wonder if I could have figured things out more properly if I had decided to forego some of these adventures, which now I'm proud of them both, and I think every journey is meant to get you where you're at today. But we went with 3 people, and you have this huge event, and so the night before we're camping out on the south side of the Grand Canyon, and then after that we're sleeping in a tent. It's like 13 to like 20 degrees the night before, and we're camping out. We hear, coyotes howling, and we hear elk bugling, and it was freaking awesome. But the next morning you wake up and you're very nervous because, one, there's one thing you don't want to be, and that is the person that causes the group to suffer. And so your entire preparation before that was hoping to get in as much physical condition as possible. And the workouts were insufferable. The mindset was very do or die, if that makes sense. But we all had this the back of our thought being, oh man, 50 miles is a lot. 50 miles within 24 hours is a lot. And that's a lot for anybody. But that was the goal. So we wake up, we go down into the canyon, and that first descent, it's like getting down into the canyon, I feel like took us about 12 miles. About 12 miles of just going downhill, and every rock was at least like a 12-inch step. You're stepping down imagine having a 12-inch box and stepping down from it for 12 miles. That was quite a bit of work there. And then we get to about mile 13, so we get to Phantom Ranch, and then we walk another mile, and I see a bunch of donkeys down there. And it's beautiful. You got these like flowers down there, the sun's come up, you see the sunrise while you're in this barren, deep, rugged landscape that is this as vast as can be. You can't even comprehend it. But the words that happened, the words I remember was one of the people in the group said, "I believe I'm having doubts already." And that stuck with me because there's always, I've maybe talked about it before, but there's always these built-in safeties that folks will present in their lives, whether they notice it or not. And having had this opportunity to accomplish something physically, but know that failure, as soon as I stepped foot into that canyon, that failure was a legitimate option, it feels a bit easier, I imagine, to give myself this idea of failure and present it in front of my own face before I get to a point where it truly is my fault, if that makes sense. I could get to mile 13 and know I have like 30 or 40 miles left, but if I explain to people that early on that I'm not going to be good along the way, it makes me a little less responsible for getting in such bad shape down the road. I justify it a little bit more. And if you've ever been in an endurance event or been in groups, even like a football team or team sports, you've kind of known that person. That person kind of finds ways to make their situation feel worse than everyone else's situation. And then all of a sudden you're like running laps for them, right? Because the coaches are mad that someone's slacking behind, or it's interesting. But I'll get to the explanations of how that expresses endurance in just a little bit. But yeah, we get 13 miles in, and then all of a sudden we're just coasting, man. We just walk for miles and miles and miles and kind of jogging downhill, and we ascend to the north of the canyon and get to the north rim. And I just remember the sound of keys jangling. And keep in mind, everyone's in pain, but I was handed keys, and this person had said, "I'm staying. Here are my keys. You deserve to do this. Go on." In the back of my mind, I was like, "What?" Yeah, this is the Grand Canyon. I don't know anybody in this canyon. I don't know if anyone's down there too. I don't know anyone in Arizona. Where am I supposed to go? You're gonna stay here. You're almost in Vegas. You're gonna stay in this random cabin in Vegas that's, on the north rim of the Grand Canyon. And also, like, all of the shuttle buses are not taking anyone back. So it is literally you stay there and then find a ride at some point, or you walk back through the canyon for another 28 and a half miles or whatever. 20 miles. I think it was 21. Math. But yeah, the keys jangled. It was just kind of like a slap in the face, and also like, damn, part of me felt a little disrespected because I'm like, do you realize that if I go down there and I don't make it, I'm dead? And if I break my ankle, which there's a funny part coming up, if I break my ankle down there and there's no one there to help me, what do you think I'm going to do in the bottom of the Grand Canyon? I'm going to get eaten by a mountain lion or become one of the deer, right? I got to figure out a way, I guess. Inevitably, he was told that there were no rooms available at this place, and he was like, a little teary-eyed. He goes, "We got to go back." And I was like, "Yeah, heck yeah." So we descended back into the canyon to continue our journey. Long story short, because of the waiting time, that waiting period, we got way off schedule for time. So now all of a sudden, it's dark outside in the canyon, and so now you don't see beauty, you just see your feet in the Grand Canyon. And if you look up, if you turn your lights off, you couldn't see your hands in front of your eyes. That's how dark it was down there. The stars were beautiful. It's probably about midnight by now, and we're about halfway through the journey back. We know that the worst part of the trip is coming up, which is the ascent through Bright Angel. We went down South Kaibab to the North Rim through Phantom Ranch, and then we came back, and then we wanted to end with Bright Angel. Because why wouldn't you end the worst trail ever with the hardest, one of the most dangerous trails in America, I guess, as far as injuries and heat strokes go. And then all of a sudden, I slipped on a rock. I think we were jumping across a river and a stream down there. You couldn't really see, but you had your little headlamp. Mine was getting dimmer because my batteries were dying, and of course I didn't bring them. I didn't plan on being there at night. It's funny how that works. And I jumped, and my foot kind of hit a rock, and the rocks rolled underneath me, and my post-tibial tendon tore, which is this tendon that kind of lines underneath the malleoli, which is that little knuckly feeling of your ankle. That's your malleoli, and there's a little tendon or ligament that rides underneath it, and mine freaking tore, man. It was so painful. And so the entire ascent up Bright Angel was with a torn foot, and that inevitably crept up into my hamstring. The way I was walking, I just started straining my hamstring because I just couldn't put pressure on my foot, and so I was overreaching and overextending with my leg. And man, the thoughts I had there were a lot. I felt really bad for myself. I was also very angry, and the entire time I was so frustrated with this other person who had made this journey not as enjoyable, I suppose. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, I'm someone that needs to step up their game because I do not want to be the person who is the fallback, right? So you kind of have to suck it up a little bit. And every moment from that moment on, every step you took, you considered paying the 10 grand to get a helicopter and call a helicopter and get you out of there. But every step, and along the way, if you have that headlamp on for so long, you're looking at your feet. Every time you see a sign, the vision looks like this. You don't really comprehend what you're seeing. You've been up for over 24 hours. You've been walking cumulatively about 17. I'm telling you, we were there at that North Rim waiting for that hotel for probably 3 or 4 hours. It was pretty insane. But it sucked. But yeah, we're walking up the trail, and every step hurt. No one was talking to each other. All you heard was the sound of gravel scrubbing underneath people's feet. Just constant steps. Water running. It's beautiful. And I just remember being in so much pain. And I remember we heard a sound, and me and this other guy, we looked up, and there was 2 little beady eyes that you could see with your headlamp. They're just glowing in the darkness. And I, at this point, thought I was delirious. And I walked up to it, and I go, is that a lemur? And it was a ringtail cat. I've never seen one before in Arizona. And there was a ringtail cat that Madagascar had just came up onto this trail where there's a freaking 100+ foot, maybe 1,000 foot drop of elevation, and it just came on to the trail and it sat and looked at you. As soon as it turned around, we heard some rock tumble down the top side, the cliff side, and I was like, what the hell was that? We looked to our left, and there's a deer on the side, so there's a ringtail cat that just ran away from us, and then there is a deer. Well, this guy took 1 step forward, and that's all it took to kind of scare the deer away, and that deer shot up the mountainside and created a rock fall. So amidst the delirium that I was in, I grabbed this guy by the neck and pulled him down, and we both fell backwards, probably a foot or 2 off of the edge of the cliff there as the other guy is behind us. This is a funny moment, but we're like heart pumping, and finally the other guy like he kind of goes around the switchback, comes back around it, and he goes, "What the hell was that?" And so we're sitting there on this cliffside, and this deer had created this rock slide that almost just knocked us into the depths of the Grand Canyon. And all the while, there was a moment where I completely forgot about the pain I was in. And so we carry on. My vision gets more blurry, and then it's about 3 or 4 a.m. We ascend, finally, we finish. And the worst part about that story, and the best part about it, is one, I finished. Two, I realized who I really was, and at least in the physical sense of what I'm capable of. And it's the first time I've really pushed the pain threshold and accomplished something what was experience. You know, there are probably better ways to do it, but no one got to have that experience. You know what I mean? So sometimes people will be like, why would you do that? Well, I will say, like, hey, I did experience something that was so profound and so extreme and yet so personal to me that you can't and haven't done it. And there is a sense of not just accomplishment, but something about getting to a point, a time threshold, where effort then meets the time, and then how you respond to that kind of really shows my character in the end, which is what I'm about to get to in a second. To finish that story, we went to a McDonald's. I fell asleep with a hot coffee in my hand and actually burnt myself. And then we went and grabbed a beer, and then I got home and then went to work to train people at 5 a.m. that next morning. And that was my rim to rim to rim story. There's so much more to it, but if you really want to know, you'll have to ask me personally, or maybe I'll write about it and you guys can read it. But there's something unique about endurance, and to me it speaks to the spirit of the person, or the spirit of the motivation behind things. You get to explore what it's like to prepare for things. You know, when the time to perform comes, the time to prepare is gone. Not only that, you get to possibly explore you get to test the boundaries of what you thought you knew about yourself. And really what happens is when you start an endurance event or an endurance journey, you essentially have a 100% success rate at putting yourself in the same room as the person you have disagreed with and been the biggest enemy of your entire life, which is actually yourself. You know, think about it. If you were to get in the elevator with somebody, you step into the elevator, but that somebody was you, and you have 1 to 1,000 stories to climb on that elevator. I'm just curious on who would be the first, how quickly you would want to, click like a fake level. Like, would you ride that elevator all the way to the top? Could you be in the same room with yourself for that long? Most would find a way to get off on the 3rd floor or the 10th floor. You know, how many people would ride that elevator all the way up and have that conversation with yourself purposely? And that's what an endurance event does. That's what endurance does. That's what training does. And there's scales. And I think what happens is, I think endurance in general is, endurance begins when you have the desire to quit. When the first feeling of the desire to quit initiates, the endurance begins. Because that is the moment you get to decide if you're going to stick through something or if you're going to find a reason to escape what it is that's making you so uncomfortable. The coolest thing about endurance in my life has been it kind of comes from an intrinsic desire to find something that I did not know was within myself. And hopefully, like, if the experience is right and the dosage is right and the emotional consequences from this effort are right, I get to transcend what I thought I knew about myself. And so it's a special place. It's almost like a spiritual ground, right? It's an effort. Yeah. remember that Grand Canyon trip, man. It was really amazing. It was also one of the first endurance events I did. That was more than I thought I was physically capable of. By nature, endurance is something that's a bit more. There's not many people who do it just for the physical condition of. There's something spiritually driven about it. There's something that is accomplishing. There's something that speaks to the human nature, that says, I want to accomplish. I'm willing to put aside my gratification, this instant gratification, and be willing to step in the same room with myself and explore what it's like to not only test the boundaries of my physical prowess and condition, but also like my psychological health and being. Like, can I endure myself longer? And in some sense, if I thought about what a training session of endurance is, it's almost like a classroom. And you can consider it like going to class that day is an event or the training session. And then the lesson taught will be the time that was prescribed and the emotional development or consequence that comes from the response. So it's very similar to Viktor Frankl's, you have stimuli, space, then your response. In the endurance world, you kind of get the stimuli being like the training effort. You have the amount of time that you have to put in that effort, and your response is usually this psychological manner of do I continue on, do I carry on, or do I kind of find ways to slowly dwindle away? And just like any school, as you progress in your teachings and as you progress as a student of yourself and your physical body, you get to kind of graduate to newer and more advanced classes. In my opinion, it does seem that there is in order to actually navigate self and within the fitness world or training efforts, it does seem like there is a time domain. And there's usually probably a threshold required to put you in the same space up here. For me, it's probably, I think anything for me, about over an hour. If I do something for over an hour, and this could really, if you think about anything, any task that you're you are mentally engaged in for over an hour, it does seem like you get a little bit, the word quit gets a little bit louder. Like if you start a run or you start a bike or you start a training session and you initially are like, this is uncomfortable, but I'll keep going. As time compounds, quitting becomes much, much louder. Not wanting to do something and then really saying, I want to quit, becomes prevalent as you continue your efforts. And so really it's just a tool. It's an emotional tool. I think the biggest reason why I got into endurance was I felt the need to prove to myself. Maybe back in the day I felt like I could be considered a quitter or somebody who doesn't continue. And so I started getting into running and I got into triathlons a little bit. And there was that spiritual element of being like, I want to prove to myself that I can carry on. And if I do that enough, I can condition my mind to be a bit more strong when things start to get tough. And the problem is, you can have somebody who's very physically fit, but not mentally fit. And so sometimes I think people focus on, the purpose of endurance and training and that effort and that sense and that derived expression that we have internally. If people focus too much on the physical or the mental or emotional component too much, I think you take the scale and it starts to do this a little bit. It gets a little wonky. when people focus too much on the physical prowess and the art of winning, they kind of lose the emotional tool that it seems to be utilized for. If you look at people who do ultra endurance events, there are people who take part in championships, but most it's treated like a journey. And within that journey, they can write about all the emotional development and consequences they had for their efforts or lack thereof, the moments of pain and longing, the desire to quit or not to, the loss of self and possible ego death. It's really interesting. And so sometimes I do think that we today get a little further and further away from using things as a training tool and what's the purpose of it. Not just the physical body, but also like the spiritual aspect of what it means to be someone who can endure. Because I think back to that loss of self, whenever we get in positions that require time and effort and extended durations, the problem today is we have what we call instant gratification. And instant gratification cannot work in something that has a time threshold required in order to achieve what it is that you get or benefit from it. I think people have confused the art of having pride. You know, pride today is almost shown in like just, we'll say, arbitrary like feats. You know, it's pride of like this very quick thing I was able to manage or put together and then show and express powerfully, and strength like, you know, it's almost like in the fitness community, maybe like a 1 rep max bench press, or, you know, a big heavy back squat. But the problem is, if we go back to what endurance is about, not just the emotional connection with yourself, endurance is a journey. Endurance is not just the event. The event is the prize, but what it really is a way for you to sit with yourself and commit time and sacrifice and put these things together and battle and go through a training program and routine that constantly wants you to fail and test the boundaries of not just what you're physically capable of, but how much you can mentally handle. How much energy do you have remaining to put towards other things? Because everybody can express strength. We do it a lot. We do it like in conversations. For instance, everyone has an opinion, right? How often do we see people express their opinions boastfully and proudly? It's like a form of strength. They show their strength. But on the back end of that, it's like how many people do we see who can sit in a conversation and like listen? Maybe in the back of their mind, they're like, what an idiot. But in reality, they're sitting here, they're saying, yes, I'm listening. There's that thought, I want to talk, but I'm going to listen. Endurance and strength show up in tons of situations in our life. And for me personally, endurance is something that I have been most proud of. And that's just on the event scale and how we can use, you know, conditioning as a way to set us in the same room as ourselves. But the science of conditioning, this will all add up in just a second. The science of endurance is kind of like you have skeletal muscle fibers that can be conditioned, and are slow twitch muscle fibers is what they call them, type 1 muscle fibers. And those take time to develop, and they take a lot of energy and effort and repetition. You have your body and how it uses oxygen efficiently, and you know, you've probably heard the the word or phrase, the VO2 max, but how your body can utilize oxygen and does it do it efficiently is one of the big ones. You have connective tissue like your ligaments and tendons that have to develop and turn, basically go through what is called collagen synthesis, or basically collagen being like this kind of protein like thing in your body that helps support structures. And then that has to develop. And then all the while, not only are you having to take the time required, these months and months and months of time that's required to be a conditioned human being in order to endure the physical efforts, what we're not realizing is amidst those efforts, we're getting the psychological maturity of putting yourself in the same room and meditating over those thoughts and ideas that ruminate in your mind. So whenever I'm training for events, every single time I train for something, how often is the word "you're going to fail"? This is too hard. I can't do this. The benefits of the person who trains that way is they get to practice that. It's almost like doing the math problem. The math problem frustrates you, maybe you give up the first time. The second time you attempt it a little bit better. The third time maybe you start getting good at it, and then eventually you can kind of fix that problem every single time, or a problem that's using the same formula. And the formula is the stimulus being, okay, the shitty thought, you're a quitter, and then my space, no I'm not, and my response being I carry on. That is endurance in essence. And the best part is, it is the ego killer for people who love the instant gratification. Because the truth is about endurance and what it's like to endure is that it's usually rooted in failure. It's rooted in a physical effort that is testing the boundaries of what's possible, and then it's also a tool that allows you to get to your psychological destiny. When I think of endurance and its internally derived attribute that I hope to continue to condition in my life, it seems that people who do not do well with things like that, like endurance, have poorly tuned egos. And anytime there is a time constraint on something that requires effort, usually there is a big pushback. Because usually what I have to do, and you'll hear this a lot, you'll go ask, someone who's pretty athletic, who's maybe not interested in endurance, but just ask them what they think about running. And we'll hear it all the time. This isn't about, man, running's bad for your hips, joints, and knees. It's like, I've seen a lot of people run into their 70s, and I've seen 20-year-olds who have to stop. So, whatever that is, if you can run, then you should run. It's if you enjoy it. And regardless, if you present the idea of an endurance event or something to someone, usually it's like, oh, why the hell would I do that? I would never do that. That's dumb. I used to train a guy who was training for the Rangers, a special operations for the U.S. Army, and he was an absolute stud. Like jacked, looked like a guy out of an action figure, like box. Just an absolute unit. But when I give him a certain amount of time that he's aware of, and then he knows like the physical effort required, he's very good at it. It's usually within that 10 to 20 minutes, he can go forever. I remember one day, and this is just how the ego likes to play on things. Once the introduction of potential failure in your life, it's funny how people respond. I had him get on the treadmill, and this was going to be a 6x400 meter repeat day. And in that world, that's a pretty basic workout, but instead what I did that day, it was going to be 6x400 meters, and I planned on keeping it that way, I'm pretty honest. What happened was, I put him on the treadmill, and then I got a towel. And I set that pace about 5 seconds faster per 400 meters than what he usually runs. Just to push the pace. And 400 meters, I don't know how long he took, but I just, if you're finishing in, I don't know, a little over a minute, it's probably a decent time. But I set that towel down and set that pace, and it was like the person changed. Panic, despair, complaints. This is a guy who just did like a 6 mile run the other day at like a 6 minute 6 minute and 50 second pace, super in shape. You set that pace to 6 minutes, or a 6 minute per mile pace, whatever pace he was running, and all of a sudden it was like, whoa, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do it. And that's just because the towel was over the time. So if you think about like people, whenever they get in points of life that are unknown, and I can explain my own personal life, but man, the panic, when people can't control the situation and all they have to rely on are their efforts, and then trust that the time domain is, their efforts within that time domain will be worthwhile, the quitting becomes obvious. Quitting is first response for almost everybody. Give up, stop it, can't do it, it's too much to endure, I can't go on. And so the funny thing is, that day he actually didn't finish the 400 meters. That was a pretty interesting thing. I've never tried that before, and then I realized that was something that people need to train. People need to train what it's like to have time domains that exceed the threshold of what they're comfortable with, and then in that time they get to train their panic and their distrust of time and effort, and figure out a way to calm themselves during hard feats and hard times in their life. How you respond to efforts and time speaks a little bit into the character behind the mask. It speaks a little bit more to what's going on at home and how you handle adversity in your life. How you choose to endure is how you choose to love others. And if you cannot endure for yourself, then you at least need to choose the other, right? It's really hard, man. I think about people, and including myself, when I was in Phoenix, I was sitting in this time of my life where I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? Who am I? Can I do this for much longer? And this panic and anxiety and distrust of what's going on in my personal life, and I didn't want it to continue, man. It was so hard. And how hard is it to commit to duration and time and not know what's on the other side of it? A lot of people can't do it. In that book Mastery, Robert Greene talks about it, how the biggest issue with people who are talented is they get to a point where they reach that peak. They get to the stimuli, and then they reach the peak of, okay, that stimuli is kind of like leveling off to what is like this barren wasteland of unknown. And most people choose to run away from it. But he said the road to mastery is the diligence and the nuance behind boredom and detail. And then on the other side of that, within that barren landscape, if you just continue with the boredom, eventually you end up on the other side of that desert, which is mastery, purpose, and value. And so endurance, in essence, is how you choose to endure, is not just how you choose to love and take care of yourself in life, but how you choose to love others. It's like a relationship. I step foot into this relationship that presents the opportunity of failure. I put forth my efforts with the unknown of the amount of time it may take to win this lady's heart, or man's heart, right? I sit down and have to consider who it is I am and am becoming along this journey? Do I become diligent with the basics, and can I change route? And if I'm lucky, and if my spirit and my physical condition and my mental condition has been correct, eventually I get to the end, the finish line, to the grand old prize being this person's heart. And that is just where the story begins, because the story comes after the journey. Right? You have to live to tell the story. Pretty classic, but I thought you guys would appreciate that. But it's true. I feel like most stories, to me, at least me personally, I personalize them a lot with the ability to endure. I was talking to a buddy of mine about this, but he used to say this thing in business that he can out-endure anybody. Still says it. But you think about these people, and they've been through times in their life that exceed the boundaries of what you thought was humanly possible. You get to a point where you don't know if you can carry on, and then you make that decision that you are going to go onwards, because despite your suffering, physical labor, and hardship, that you know what is at the grand prize or at the end is probably better than where you're at now. But it takes the conscious effort to say onwards, and it also takes the conscious effort to sit down with yourself long enough momentarily to be like, you're not quitting today. You're going to put one more foot forward. Endurance training, for instance, and endurance in life and success seems to be there is one truth, and that there are no shortcuts. You cannot replicate what is time plus effort and your response to it. In fitness, people say high intensity interval training, but what they don't do and what they can't train is what it's like to go for 90 plus minutes, and then once you hit that 90 plus minute mark, psychologically, they don't realize that that's its own form of training. It is a place in life that you can only get to if you exceed the boundaries of the time threshold where you are comfortable. Once you have the desire to quit, that is when your endurance begins. It's really cool. Some of the greatest runners in the world, and you look at some of those people, they're so calm. Some will be like, well, part of that's because their brain's a little fried or whatever from just constant endurance, but that they're very comfortable in themselves. I've noticed that a lot. Seems like they're well-spoken. They're very calculated in their efforts and their training. Their preparation is awesome. And then also see that in people who have owned multiple businesses. They don't get as worried or anxious about subtle details. They have a system and a plan, but are able to navigate off of it if things go outside the boundaries of what they're comfortable with. And it's kind of like most people haven't spent the time with themselves to meditate over those mindful, ruminating thoughts and take the time to consider the emotional consequences that they get to develop and how they get to express that to the world. How much do you love your business? Can you endure it? Can you endure the people who come in, who come out? Can you endure the failures and the triumphs? Can you endure the conversations that have to be required in order to keep growing? Can you have those hard conversations with yourself? Do you allow people to speak into you? Are you willing to sacrifice and let go of your ego in order to see your way through? In order to love others, it's expressed in how well you choose to be disciplined enough and meditate your own mind in order to see things through. You have to see your way through. Yeah. The fitness journey, the endurance, the ultra endurance event, It's no different than business. If someone opens a business, it's no different than relationships and going through hardship and physical pain and suffering and choosing to carry on despite your suffering. That's love. You know? When the gun goes off, it can become quite scary, especially when the universe has put you in an ultra endurance event that has no time domain. You don't know how many miles you're going to run. You have to partake in essentially what is continuous and consistent action despite the unknown of time, the unknown of where to go. You have to kind of meditate over your mind throughout that. In this ultra endurance event, you're on a poorly marked trail. You don't know where you're going. You don't know if there are any people along the way, how many miles you'll have to go. Are there aid stations there? At some point in that time, you get to choose, like, are you going to keep carrying on, or are you going to put one foot in front of the other despite your desire to quit? And if you love yourself enough, you might make it to the end, or if you fail along the way, you might course correct back and find ways to become useful, and then find ways to try again. Maybe we prepare better next time. If we do it right, and if our spirit is conditioned well, and we have prepared our physical body, and we've kind of fought through that desire to quit and go through your physical hardships and pain, and you express your will and spirit to endure things, you might help people along the way. And in most cases, that's how we express our love. And in this case, this endurance event is our life. How you choose to endure and how you express that outwardly is how you choose to love people. The finish line at the end is, do you have a life that is sweet and giving because you have chosen, despite our own personal and internal conflicts, we have meditated that and suppressed that enough to not act selfishly and quit when it is that if I get to the finish line, I might see people on the other end, or I had an opportunity along this way to help people. It does seem like life is much sweeter when you choose to carry on, or say onwards. If you can't fly, then run. And if you can't run, then walk. And if you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Dr. Martin Luther King. The truth is that endurance gives you like an elevated taste of life. For some, if you're capable, you can partake in it. You can go try and do things that are so challenging that you not only have to physically prepare and emotionally prepare for it, but your spirit has to drive you to get there. And if you get to a point where you get the desire to quit, you finally get to put yourself in the same room with the person you ran away from the entire time. You. And if you can't, the truth is we're already in that event. And so if there's not a physical option for you to go out and explore ultra endurance, the mindful rumination's going on right now. How I choose to wake up every day is going on every day. The brushing the teeth consistently and continuously. Making sure I exercise and walk 7,000 to 10,000 steps no matter how I feel. My desire to quit. My life is endurance. And how I choose to endure is how I also love others. And if I cannot endure for me, then I at least can do it for them. Cheers, guys. See you next week.